not something that I would recommend for everyone, but just do it, just do it because there's good moments. You can start at 16 years old or 40 or 45. It doesn't matter. Of course, there's maybe sometimes financial constraints, we talked about kids and stuff.
Sure.
Sometimes you have other constraints and risks that you can't bear, but otherwise, just do it whenever you can. And then, about the emotion, the excitement, I think the one thing that is interesting is that a lot of people are giving you like advice and, like none of them are like the same. Some people will just, you're crazy, living in such a great position. You don't know where you're going and how you're going to get paid, how you're going to pay your bills. And you're just like, I don't know, I'll figure it out. And that's how it works. It's still very much like this today, right? 4 years after we started, right? So that was one thing that was kind of important. And then I think there's this moment of freedom. And I think this is something that I didn't cherish like quite enough at the time. When you are totally free, you have the liberty to explore anything, talk to anyone. Now you have like team members, customers, constraints, board members, investors, And I think at that time I was like, oh, I really want to get to that point where I get all these great responsibilities and problems that I have to tackle. But the truth is that at that time, just having a blank piece of paper seemed like a little bit of a stress, but it was amazing actually back at that time. Like we just interviewed people trying to understand problems. The first idea we wanted to work on, I was very focused on that because this is what I was doing at the bank in the first days, was like financing. So I was financing like large companies, and I said, how can we bring financing to smaller companies in a more, with a more tech approach of like doing insurance? Because there were a lot of great examples in the US. It did not exist really in Europe back at that time. And I was like, let's do this kind of lending type of fintech. I thought it was kind of really compelling. But the great thing about this, and that's really the feeling of freedom, was just like, we interviewed like hundreds of finance teams and, CEOs, and trying to understand like what's the need. And it's a great moment because everyone loves entrepreneurs. So everyone is like, yeah, I'm going to spend 20 minutes talking to you and telling how great your idea is. I think it's a little tricky because you realize after that even though they say that it's a great idea, they're not necessarily going to buy your product in the end.
Yeah.
But that's like a kind of a very traditional control machine bias that I discovered like well after the fact. But anyway, it was a great moment, great emotion.
Yes.
It was well before any trouble occurred.
Yeah. What, you talk about this discovery process, and Upflow was kind of a secondary idea that you were working on while you're working on another company. Talk about the discovery process, learning about what customers needs, and then evolving this product, working on another one, and what inspired the idea for Upflow eventually and moving in that direction.
Yeah. So it's actually it was a good journey for us because I've always been interested in fintech. I wanted to apply fintech to kind of a more traditional B2B space. And we started interviewing people around like, okay, so how can we lend you money in a more dynamic, in a more easy way, which makes a lot of sense, like it's a pretty basic idea, right? And the thing is just that we were trying to get to a little bit of as to the why, why do you need to borrow money? Why do you need to cover like short-term gaps in terms of cash management and stuff? And the funny thing was that as we interviewed people, we realized that like very oftentimes, like the answer when you were thinking in terms of short-term financing, which is what we wanted to do, was more around like, well, I have to pay my bills. I can't get paid by customers on time. So I just need to bridge that gap. And I think the idea of Upflow came because we realized that like building a financing organization was like really complex. We required a lot of capital to get started. But on the basis of those interviews, and that's why it's really important to do all of those interviews when you get started, we just realized that maybe there was something much more obvious than lending money, which was just helping those businesses actually get paid, right? Because when you think about it, and it's kind of crazy, but it took us like a long time to realize that getting paid in the B2B space today in 2023 or 29, 19 at the time, it's just like, it's crazy. It hasn't changed in the last 50 years, right? You send an invoice. It's not the paper invoice anymore. You just wait for 30 days. You have to chase it. Then when you want to pay, it's like a very manual process where you have to go, like, in the US, it's still like a lot of checks. So literally putting a paper in an envelope, which is crazy. And, if it's not checked, it's like wire transfer ACH, which is also really manual, prone to errors. And basically the idea was just like, well, you just look at all payment verticals, like in the consumer space with Venmo, online with Stripe, for subscription with Go Cardlets, et cetera, with Plaid, just like all of the players. And you just realize that B2B is the last space that hasn't been revolutionized. And so we're just like, okay, let's get on this very simple idea, very simple product that is about helping you managing your, what we call the cash collection. So basically how you collect your cash. And then we'll take it from there. Maybe we do financing as a second step, right? So we still have financing on our roadmap, but it's really like about one, how do you get paid on time? Second, like how can we finance you? And it's already like helping businesses get paid on time is already like a long and complex topic. So we were just like, we're still getting started on this one.
Yeah. Do you envision, the financing piece helping rather than businesses kind of, I would say, patch the holes in the ship versus helping them, invest into either, I guess, a different expansion, different features, different products, or kind of growing their business. That's what the hope is for financing, or is there?
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right, Julian. I think the point here was just around the idea that, like, if you have, like, if you're running out of money, I can lend you like, $100 or $1,000, right? This is great. It's going to help you get to the next month and pay your bills, but this is not going to solve like the underlying problem, which is how do you collect your cash, right? So we try to apply the same idea to businesses, and it's like this pragmatic approach where we say, one, you need to get 100% of your turnover on your bank account.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies are really focused, especially in the startup environment these days. Like everyone is focused on MLR revenues and stuff, but very few companies are actually focused on, hey, do we get that money on the bank account? So that's what we're here for. And then we say, once you get to that point, once you earn money on a regular basis and stuff, then maybe we can finance you. And actually we can leverage the data that we have on the platform to like financing. But, this is not something we started. There's so much that needs to be done on just, the communication piece of it, the collaboration, payments method, just trying to modernize the payment method that people are using, that there's already like a bunch of things to do and a great piece to build just out of that. So that's where we are.
Is it, do you think, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, is it the type of customers that a certain company has that is difficult to maybe like, collect payments on? Is it the communication piece? Is it technology? Where are the gaps that are difficult for a lot of companies? I'm sure a lot of our founders, know because it haunts them at night, but for our audience in more depth, what are you seeing that is common for the companies that you're working with that's difficult to select?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing that we often say is that when you talk about late payments and trouble collecting cash, like the first thing that comes to mind is always like bad payers, right? You believe in the impression that like you only have bad payers out there, or Fortune 500 companies that, try to optimize the cash flow so that they can save and, just a bit of money and stuff. And I'm not saying that like it doesn't exist. There are bad payers, but the truth, and we now have the data in our product as we process like, north of like, now $2 billion a quarter worth of money. It's just that the truth is a technological problem, right? It's just the simple idea. I'm sure you received that, like being a co-founder as well, right? You read this invoice and you just like, it's in the mailbox and you just set a reminder. And basically what you dream about is just like this button where you say, I'm happy with this invoice, let's pay, and let's forget about it. And that's not how it is, right? When you buy a pair of shoes online, or when you buy a pair of shoes in the store, you're just going to put up a phone and just like put it and say, well, I don't know how this works, but I just paid and I'm gone, right? And it's crazy to think that like in the B2B space, no. First, you need to send the invoice to your accountant. Then you need to wait for 3 validations. Then they're going to open the bank account. Then they're going to the story, right? But it's super complex. So I think like what we're trying to explain to our users is really the fact that like you need to provide good technology to both our users, so the merchants and the customers, so that we kind of streamline this overall payment experience. So there's a lot of things involved. You rightly pointed that out. Like it's about communication, when you're talking about collection, not only about invoices and payments, also like, are you happy with the service you provide? Are you looping in the right people at the right moment? Do you provide the right payment method? Because you're not going to get paid the same way if you're in the US or in Europe. And even depending on the type of customers, maybe some of them will still want to pay by check, whatever you do. Some would be very happy to pay by card, but you need to have like the technology to enable that. These kind of things are actually getting much more complex than when people think. When you think about sending an invoice, getting a payment, It's actually much more complex. And that's what we create with our product. It's just really building this hub where finance and business teams can actually collaborate to better collect their revenues. So that's the idea.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear because now validates a lot of the issues that we have with collecting. And you're right. It's really, it's like making sure we have the right person or, sending an invoice and giving them the chance to look over it, validate it within whoever needs to in their team. There's a lot that goes into it. And especially when you're doing, B2B, you've got to understand that they're also waiting for payments as well. So it's a whole kind of ecosystem that drives it. We talked a little bit about, the traditional route and kind of the culture you were in company wise, but now as a founder, now that you're able to build culture, thinking about that piece, I always like to ask, how do you view culture? How do you view building a successful startup? You hated the cultures you were in or wanted them to change maybe little by little in the companies that you were working with that are working for, but now that you're building your own, how are you viewing that piece in terms of creating a team that's successful, productive, and continues to grow?
Yeah, it's actually something that is like one of my key focus as a founder here at Upflow. Now that we get past the point of like, is there someone who wants to buy our product?
Yeah.
When you get to this point where, and you're starting to think about like building a long lasting business, right? You want to be here like in 10, 20 years time. And really that's what we're after. And I think, one thing that I often do and I highly encourage like other founders to do is just like asking people that are 2, 3, 5 years ahead of you to kind of like give you feedback on mostly like the mistakes that they made. Because I think it's really hard to replicate like successes because oftentimes like successes are the result of like a compounding effect of a lot of small things. So that's why when you have a successful business, you can't just say, oh, they had this idea, so I'm just going to copy paste it. This is not how it works. I think like mistakes are easier to spot. And one thing that a lot of founders told me, and I really thank them for sharing that with me, is the fact that like, if you don't clarify like the values and the operating principles of the company early in the process, it's usually really, really hard to scale and build something that is going to last. And that has been one of our big focus over the last couple of, I've been always obsessed with this. Like in the first days of Upflow, even it was the two of us, we had values, we wrote values and it was just like, yes, this is how we're going to hire it. And, as the team grew and when we went from 2 to 10 and then now to kind of 70 people, of course it changed a little bit, but there's some things where, 6 months ago, we took the time to sit down with the team and say, hey, let's sit down and let's look at how we operate and how we want to operate. And we actually changed it from values to what we call operating principles so that they're a little bit more actionable. We have 5 of them and it's really like, the kind of the founding principles of like how we want to hire, how we want to operate and what are the kind of things that we don't want to compromise with. And I think it's really like, it's really, really important. And that's with one of the tips, we'll see like 10 years from now, we'll have you get, I'll invite you to my podcast then at that time. Okay. And then we'll talk about this, but I think that's for us, it's been a major point in terms of like structuring, like even making sure that we have a clear agreement with everyone around. So I think it's been one of the biggest, most important thing for us.
What are the 5 principles?
I can give you the 5 principles, of course. It's just going to take like a bit of time to go into like all of the details, but I think the important thing about this,
if you just cover it,
No, it's just that, it's about like, one of them is, the first one is radically own our duties, covering like how people like have a strong sense of ownership at Upflow. There's another one called we master our craft. And it's really about this idea that like we are constantly improving. There's another one about like investing in communication and in honesty. That's something that is really important for us in terms of how you give feedback to each other, what kind of culture you want to give in terms of feedbacks and stuff. And that's like kind of like super, super important. There's another one called, we have each other's back. So really important in terms of like, especially when you're working with between engineers, product, sales, success, like really, really, really important in terms of like, you always have those teams where people are like, kind of like, just interested in their own kind of like success. This is definitely not something that we want here at Upflow, and something that like is really, really important. What is important for the team as well is just to make sure that like we understand like how like those operating principles are lived on a day-to-day basis. So whether it's like, in terms of fits, mid-fits and stuff, and that's really something that is really, really, really important. So yeah, that's the four first one. And then the last one that we have that is also super important in how we operate on a day-to-day basis is we work in small batches with long-term in mind, which describes the fact that like we want to iterate really fast on how we want to do things. And this is really something that actually came from spending those 3 months in, Y Combinator, where, it was really like this constant struggle of like, what are you going to deliver next week? And I really like that. So,